Hey, welcome back to the Sanibel Online Writers Conference. I'm here with Beth Ann Fennelly and John Dufresne. Hey, guys.
Hey,
Tom. Thanks for
Good to
having us.
see you. Yep, thanks for pivoting and going online with us. You two know as well as anyone, since you've both been coming since the beginning, how great it is to meet in person. And we were really looking forward to coming back and hanging with you. Like right now, I am convinced we would be playing pickleball on the beach if we were on Sanibel. But conditions necessitated that we move online. So I appreciate you guys making this pivot, and we've done this for the last couple of years too. So you're familiar with this as well, and we're hoping to be all together playing pickleball in a year.
You bet. Count me in.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm so thrilled that you guys are doing this session on Flash narrative because I know you're going to have a lot of really great things to say that'll be instructive to our wonderful viewing audience. But also, selfishly, I am teaching a special topics class in the spring for the first time on Flash narrative.
Great.
And so I'm basically just going to plagiarize everything you say today and put it all in my syllabus. So speak slowly.
Okay. You could just play the YouTube of it back when it's over.
Over and over and over. Yeah. There we go. So both of you are experts in Flash narrative. John, you specialize in Flash fiction. Beth Ann, you've written a book of Flash memoirs. I've got both books right here. Wait, there it is. John's writing guide, which I have assigned in my classes since it got published. And same thing with Beth Ann Fennelly's book that came out 5 years ago. I just looked at the inscription in here that you wrote in 2017. And I've been assigning this in my classes ever since then as well. And students always love them. But first, before we get into your session, I just want to remind viewers that the reason we're online is unfortunately because of Hurricane Ian. And what we're doing is we are partnering with some different organizations that are raising money to help people who were adversely affected by the hurricane. And could you flash that back up again, Margaret? There it is. Eagles in Need through Florida Gulf Coast University. FGCU, as you know, actually runs this conference, owns this conference, sponsors this conference. And so Eagles in Need is the campus hurricane aid fund. And the money raised there will all go to helping students, faculty, and staff who have been displaced and otherwise disrupted by Hurricane Ian. So please donate if you can. But for now, we are going to get back to the Flash narrative session with John Dufresne and Beth Ann Fennelly. John Dufresne has written 2 short story collections and 6 novels, including Louisiana Power and Light and Love Warps the Mind a Little. He has written 4 books on writing, including Flash, writing the very short story. His stories have twice been named Best American Mystery Stories. He is a Guggenheim Fellow and teaches creative writing at Florida International University in Miami, and he is also the co-editor of the forthcoming Flash Fiction America anthology. Beth Ann Fennelly, a 2020 Academy of American Poets Laureate Fellow, was the Poet Laureate of Mississippi from 2016 to 2021 and teaches at the MFA program at the University of Mississippi. She's won grants and awards from the NEA, the United States Artists, a Pushcart Prize, and a Fulbright to Brazil. I think I still have the postcards that you sent me from Brazil when you were down there. Beth Ann has published 3 books of poetry and 3 of prose, most recently, Heating and Cooling, 52 micro-memoirs, which was a good reader's favorite and an Atlanta Journal Constitutional Best Book. She lives with her husband, the author Tom Franklin, and their 3 children in Oxford, Mississippi. Guys, thank you again for participating. Please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you.
Tom. I'm going to go first because I'm going to push this new book. I got to hold it up here. Flash Fiction America, which is not yet out, but it'll be out from Norton in Valentine's Day, actually. So buy it for your sweetheart. I was privileged to work with James Thomas, who started the whole sudden fiction and flash fiction anthology series that Norton has done. This will be the last one. And Sherry Flick, who edits Smoke Lawn Quarterly and is an amazing editor. The three of us worked together and put this, what we hope is a wonderful, a wonderful anthology. We just got the first review. It's not published yet, but from Publishers Weekly, calling it an elegant anthology, brims with economical, well-crafted prose, and mentions a bunch of the writers, Amy Bender, Molly Giles, Stuart Diebeck, and so forth that are in here. And throughout the author's craft, distinctive glimpses of their characters' worlds within the span of a page or two. In fact, I think we made it, the word limit was 1,000 words to get into this edition. One older editions, it was 1,500. I think for a while it was shorter than that. But so I did the introduction, why we did this, what we think flash fiction is. So let me read that to get us off, and then we'll give it over to Beth Ann. So tell me a story, a reader says. Make me laugh, make me cry, carry me away. Help me to imagine a more compelling world. Help me to understand who I am and who these other people are and what we're all doing here and why we're doing it. And if you can do that with language that is fresh and provocative, with nouns that are precise and verbs that are muscular, and if your usage is prescriptively flawless or wonderfully flawed, and if you can make me sing to the music of your prose, if you can bring the news of your world to my world, if you can tell it slant and keep it short, so much the better. Telling stories and reading them are how we make sense of the world, how we amend our bewilderment. The narrative impulse is as necessary for our survival as breathing. Flash fiction isn't new. We have had fables, of course, and folk and fairy tales, biblical parables, exempla, and Zen koans. We might also include anecdotes, jokes, and every bit of gossip we've ever heard over drinks at the kitchen table, every mumbled disclosure in the confessional or secret whispered in bed, and every introductory exchange with strangers we've met at cocktail parties. All very short, all driven by narrative. And in fact, flash might be the most prevalent form of storytelling there is. Anton Chekhov, who arguably invented the modern short story, wrote many very short stories of 600 or 700 words. Kafka gave us parables and paradoxes, and Borges his ficciones. At the turn of the last century, McClure's magazine published daily shorts. In 1926, Collier's Weekly began printing one-page narratives. Cosmopolitan followed. For more than 50 years, beginning in 1920, Nobel laureate Yasunari Kawabata wrote his spare and lyrical palm of the hand stories. Hemingway wrote very short stories in his debut collection, In Our Time. Mildred Reed and Delmore Bordeaux published a craft book, Writers, Try Short Stories. But then the form seemed to fall out of favor for a moment, only to be revived in 1969 when Robley Wilson took over the editorship of the venerable of the North American Review, and treated us to 4-minute fictions. Richard Brautigan gave the genre a boost with his compacted comic countercultural tales, as did Grace Paley and Luisa Valenzuela with their quick, emotionally charged stories, and Sandra Cisneros with their luminous vignettes in House on Mango Street, and Raymond Carver and Joyce Carol Oates and John Edgar Wideman, and also Donald Barthelme with his enigmatic postmodern shorts. Then came the anthology, sudden fiction and flash fiction. The very short story was no longer an experiment. but a recognized genre. The New Yorker publishes flash fiction these days, and Duotrope lists 483 markets welcoming flash fiction. Flash isn't new and isn't going away. Flash fiction is a narrative, or it's not, that is distilled, cogent, concentrated, layered, elusive, textured, insightful, and unpredictable. It's short but not shallow. It is a reduced form used to represent a larger, more complex story. And like the gist of a recollected conversation, it offers the essential truth, if not all the inessential facts. Like poetry, flash benefits from arbitrary constraint. In this case, 1,000 words. Why 1,000? Because you have to draw the line somewhere. Quote, art lives from constraints and dies from freedom, Leonardo da Vinci wrote. Flash makes meaning through compression. And this word limit may be all we need to begin thinking in an unhabitual way. Less is more. Brevity is both the soul of lit and an invitation to undermine the narrative conventions of the traditional short story. But you need to write a lot to write a little. To be brief takes time. Writing flash fiction is the art of omission. What you leave out is as important as what you leave in. It's not the notes you play, Miles Davis said. It's the notes you don't play. Flash esteems glance above gaze. This is fiction approaching haiku, the art of few words and many suggestions. And like haiku, flash fiction does not do our thinking for us, but starts us thinking. Does not explain, only indicates. Flash carries the collaboration between writer and reader to another level. The story is the call that awaits its response. The writer, we might say, evokes the images that the reader dreams with. In conventional stories, we expect that the central character will be changed as a result of their struggle. But plots in Flash may be elliptical, off the page, implied rather than expressed. And so it might be the reader, not the character, who is changed. The reader may be left feeling radiant joy, profound sadness, or bewildering shock. Flash fiction seems to operate like dreams, which have middles, but not many beginnings or endings. You're already falling through the air, terrified and confused. How can this be happening? And you never reach the source of the gravity before you wake. A work of Flash begins in the midst of things, advances quickly, ends abruptly. The narrative is over, but the story goes on in the mind of the reader, who has been surprised in the act of imagining, goes on in the direction suggested by the story. Flash fiction is not about a lifetime or a season. It's about a heartbeat, the vital center, the driving impulse of life. 30 years ago, in his introduction to the first Flash fiction anthology, James Thomas expressed his pleasure at presenting stories of minimal and rapid trajectory and asking the question, how short can a story be and truly be a story? Here we are again asking the answer by way of example in Flash Fiction America, exploring the varieties of cultural experience, telling our reader many very short stories, complete and resonant, which are all about all the ways all of us live in America today. That's the end. So, Beth Ann.
John, too good. I loved it. That's a beautifully written introduction. I cannot wait for that anthology. I love the previous one, and I love the way you broke it up into forms and all your discussion about it, and lots of great writing exercises. So if this new one can be half as good as that one, sign me up for Valentine's Day. I know what I want. That and diamonds, but whatever. Okay. Thank you. And yay, thanks to Mighty Blaze for helping us out today. And of course to Tom and Jason, who are so unbelievable to put this together, especially given that they're, suffering from Hurricane Ian and everything that's happened themselves. So John and I were talking about things that you can do in Flash that you can't do in other forms. And I decided to just focus on one thing that you can do in Flash that is better in Flash than other forms. And I was thinking of occasions when something happens and it can only happen once. For example, you're reading a short story and you realize the narrator's unreliable. That pleasure can only happen one time. Whether it's a novel you're reading or a piece of Flash, you only get that discovery once. And I was thinking some of the pleasures of discovery and surprise are maximized in a short form. So the metaphor I came up with was the surprise party. Because if you think about going to a surprise party, the moment when the person walks in the door and everyone yells, surprise, that's supposed to be like kind of the apex of the evening. And the party might go on for 1 hour or 5 hours, but the surprise moment you only get once. So I was thinking, what if we had, let's see, I'm going to try to share my screen with you guys. Slides. Maybe I can do it like this. Nope. If I open up my PowerPoint, can you guys see this? Can someone tell me whether you see a big yellow screen right now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. You can. Good. So hopefully everyone can. So guess what, Sanibel? You are invited to my surprise party. And here's this super awkward surprise party where everyone's standing around and, it couldn't be like kind of more tacky and miserable. So I was thinking, what are the writer's tools to create surprise that we can maximize in a short form? And I'm going to focus really briefly on 3: syntax, plot, and structure. All right. With syntax, we can think about not diction, not word choice, but unhinging parts of the sentence to arrange them for maximum impact, and especially if we're trying to create humor. So I think we can think about the sentence as movable modular parts like Legos, and always be looking to maximize the structure for impact. And if we're trying to go for humor, that normally results with putting the funny part last. So here's an example from Garrison Keillor. My mother believed that if you go out of your way to be friendly to people, they will take a liking to you. But this philosophy did not work for me because I was a leper. So the funny word is going last in that sentence. We see how the sentence is leading up to that moment. So here are a couple that I've broken down, just giving you the first part. The number one sign of being a serial killer is your brain is automatically going to think of the most boring possible answer first. But what Megan Amron wrote is killing a bunch of people, which I love. Okay, fun fact. If you stretched out your intestines, they would reach all the way to the cabin in the woods you were murdered in. Dan Guterman. I'd love to meet him personally and shake him by the neck. And what I especially love about this one is Dawn Powell wrote that in her journal. She was that entertaining just for her own self, which is kind of awesome. So what are we doing when we're creating surprise with syntax? Well, we are creating expectations that we then disrupt. And John in his talk was just mentioning haiku. And I really love haiku. I've learned a lot about compression from reading haiku. And my favorite haiku writer is Isa, as translated by Robert Hass. So let's just think how he begins this one. New Year's Day, everything is in blossom. So you'd expect something, optimistic and positive and beautiful about nature. He ends his, I feel about average. No doubt about it, the mountain cuckoo, here we're going to get some profound statement about the beauty of this bird, is a crybaby. Napped half the day. No one punished me. So I love the way he sets up an expectation and then reverses it in such a way that there's a kind of delight in the language. Okay, so we can do the same thing with our language, create expectations with our syntax and then disrupt them. So imagine asking someone how they spent Thanksgiving. That student might write, I celebrated Thanksgiving the old-fashioned way. I invited everyone in my neighborhood to my house. We had an enormous feast, and then I napped for 2 hours. Okay, fine, but yawn. So what did Jon Stewart write? I celebrated Thanksgiving the old-fashioned way. I invited everyone in my neighborhood to my house. We had an enormous feast, and then I killed them and took their land. So I love that. So syntax can actually highlight surprise by extending that part of the process in which the reader is building hypothesis. Because humans are hypothesis creating creatures. That's how we've managed to stay alive, by always thinking about what comes next. It's what our brain is doing. So we can extend that to exaggerate it and highlight the resolution. So here I'm going to give a short piece by Lydia Davis, Spring Spleen. I am happy the leaves are growing large so quickly. Soon they will hide the neighbor and her screaming child. Every time I read that, I'm filled with joy. And I realize that she's done that due to syntax. I'm happy the leaves are growing large so quickly. Oh, we're supposed to be thinking like a spring. The next line is going to be something like the butterflies are coming and the birds are returning from the south. You know, something super cliched. The way she hid that dig at the neighbor and the child at the very end increases our pleasure in arriving there. And to prove this point, I have taken her excellent piece, kept the words, and reordered them. See how much worse it is. Soon the neighbor and her screaming child will be hidden by the leaves, which are growing large so quickly. I am happy. Yawn. So she's way better than that. Okay, second thing. Surprise can happen due to plot, from putting things in unexpected orders, and by knowing what to leave out that the reader can fill in. I love what John Dufresne said, Flash doesn't do our thinking, but it starts us thinking. That was what he said in his intro. Very cool. So these, this is a little piece from this book, Hint Fiction, edited by Robert Smartwood. Stories that are 25 words or less. An impromptu robbery. The pen, which was attached to the bank counter, did not go all the way through his throat.
Yikes.
I know. I love where the brain goes. And talking about Miles Davis, your quote about it's not the notes you play, but the notes you don't play. See how we don't even know who the other person is or who actually is getting stabbed. I mean, it's just so awesome. Peanut butter. He was allergic. She pretended not to know. So I love how those just get us starting thinking. So plot in Flash narrative is frequently more stripped down and trimmed of reflection and gains energy through subtext. And then I'm also just pointing out how important these titles are. All right, so here we're looking at 1945 lithographs by Picasso. And they start in the upper left-hand corner and then go down in a column. And so he made 11 lithographs of a bull. And I think it's kind of interesting to see how hard he had to work to find the simplest shape, which is what we're doing when we're writing Flash. This is his first bull. It has some shading. It looks lightly sketched, a little pen and ink. You know, it looks, you know, pretty realistic. Interesting from that, he went to this one, which is almost like the mythological bull. It's darkly shadowed. It's exaggerated. And it made me think of sometimes as writers, how we exaggerate our own experiences to understand them better, almost like blowing up a photograph, you know, like you trip and break your toe and then you're writing a story and in the story, the character breaks their leg and it allows you to understand what happened better. So his path to simplicity included this interesting detour. This is about midway through. We're beginning to see that kind of Picasso signature, highlighting planes and angles. This is moving on. This one's number 8. He's continuing to flatten his planes. He's continuing to simplify. He's continuing to remove lines. And this is what he ended up with, which I think is so cool. So just this idea that where we're getting to by removing details is sometimes helping us see better. Okay, last thing, surprise can be created by form, as when the expectations of a piece, the way a piece looks, prompts us to make hypotheses about the content, hypotheses that are then subverted. We see this play out in hermit crab essays, in which an essay is borrowing the form of another thing. And in fact, hermit crab essays were what I was going to talk about in person in Sanibel this year. So hopefully we can all do it next year, and I'll get a chance to give you some examples of how this works. But let's look at this real quick. Disgruntled former lexicographer. The following definition was discovered in the 1999 edition of the Random House Dictionary. The crafting of this definition was the final assignment of Mr. Delhuey, who had been dismissed after 32 years with the company. So you glance down, you see it's just a normal dictionary definition. Well, we know what that is. We know how that works. Mutton, Middle English, from Old French mouton, mouton from Middle Latin, Celtic origin. 1, the flesh of fully grown sheep. 2, glove with 4 fingers. 3, 2 to charts muons. 4, 7 English tons. 5, 1 to mutinies. 6, to wear dog. And the first time I read it, I remember at that point being like, what? To wear a dog? And then backing up and realizing that they're all crazy, like a glove with 4 fingers. How could that even be a thing or have a name? It gets even sillier. Oops, fuzzy underwear for ladies, an earthling who has been taken over by an alien. Look at number 17. My wife never supported me. 18. It was though I worked my whole life and it wasn't enough for her. So we begin a narrative, which cannot happen in a dictionary definition. 19, my children think I'm a nerd. 20, in architecture, a bad idea. 21, to find this, you nitwits. 22, to blubber a figure over one's lips saying blah. 23, I would like to take a trip to the seaside where no one knows me. 24, listen to the lyrical voice coming in. I would like to be walking on the beach when a beautiful woman passes by. 25, she would stop me and ask me what I did for a living. I would tell her I am a lexicographer. 27, she would say, oh, you wild boy. Exactly that. Not one word different. 28. Then she would ask me to define our relationship, which at that point would be 1 minute old. I would demur, but she would say, oh, please define the second for me right now. I would look at her and say, mutton. She would swoon because I would say it in a slight Spanish accent, at which I'm very good. 31. I would take her hand and she would notice me feeling her wedding ring. I would ask her whom she was married to. She would say, a big cheese at Random House. So you remember that Del Delhuey got fired from Random House? 32, I would take her to my motel room and teach her the meaning of love. 33, I would use the American heritage out of spite and read all the definitions. 34, then I would read out of the Random House some of my favorites among those I worked on. Just try it. Blue, give it a shot and don't use the word nanometer. 35, I would make love to her according to the OED 6th definition. 36, we would call room service or tagliolini without even looking it up. 37, I would return her to the beach and we would say goodbye. 38, give her an email. The last one, Muttonheads, the Random House people. So that's by Steve Martin. And I love the way he played with that form and used the shape of the dictionary definition to tell the story of this man who wrote the definition who was fired by Random House. And I love the surprise that comes out of that form. So that's it for me. I've stopped sharing. So hopefully, John, are we back in the main room there? You don't see my screen anymore, right?
I'm not sure. I wanted to read a flash story from the anthology because it follows on what you said, the surprise in the language. And it's again, obviously very short story by Molly Giles, called My Ex. My ex never finishes his sentences. He'll start off with, did you see? And then stop. When we first met, I thought it was charming. I'd prompt him, did I see what, darling? Silence. After we were married, less charmed, I'd jump in with my own offerings. Did I see the full moon last night? Did I see the red dog? Did I see the fat man in drag? I was never right. My ex would listen, correct me, and disappear. He could literally disappear, an act that should have made us money. I think I'll go, he'd say. And I'd say, and I'd chip in with a hopeful, to the store, only to hear him say, to India. 1 minute he'd be standing next to me, and the next minute he'd be in a cab heading out to some airport, or in bed, asleep, or in the garden, watering the roses he claimed I never took care of. At the end, in the lawyer's office, when I admitted that I never knew where he went, what he did, or whom he did it with, he shook his head sadly and said, that was because I could not read his mind. She's so, he said to the lawyer. Exhausted, the lawyer said. The lawyer and I said together. Impatient, he said. It was true, and why not? Years had rushed by, and I still didn't know him. In fact, that was what he often referred to me. "You'll never know how much I love you," he'd say. And then, not unkindly, he'd laugh. After the divorce, there were sightings. A friend saw him at an art museum trying on silk scarves. My sister saw him pass her on the bridge in a silver Jaguar. A neighbor heard him talking Farsi with an Iranian rug dealer. We decided he either worked for the CIA or in the FBI or the DEA or all of them. Just last week, 5 years after our divorce, I bumped into him in a bookstore. He was standing in a corner reading the obituaries in the New York Times out loud to himself. He was dressed in his surfer shorts and hoodie. He had grown a mustache and had a pair of mirrored sunglasses on. "Hi," I said. He looked up, unsurprised. "Oh, hi," he said. "How are?" "I'm fine," I said. "The roses." I took a deep breath. He looked thin and raggedy. It occurred to me he might be homeless. I'm having the Witherspoons over for lunch on Sunday," I said. "Our old neighbors. Would you like to come? Do they still have their 2 poodles?" "Yes." "2 timing son-in-law living with them?" "Lunch is at noon," I said, "and I never slept with their son-in-law, if that's what you're thinking." How do you know what you're thinking? "Whether he's still living with them or not." "Noon," I repeated. I was shaking when he left. Sunday came, and of course, no ex. The Witherspoons and I had barbecue and gin and tonics, and had just settled into the living room to watch the US Open when the poodles started barking. And the son-in-law said, "There's a man in your backyard." I shrugged his hand off my thigh and stood up. My ex was in the garden watering the roses. It was as if no time had passed. I went out to him. "Did you see?" he said. "No," I said, "I didn't." "Hand me that hose, please." He handed me the hose, and I aimed the nozzle straight at him, and the blast was so strong it knocked him down, butt down, and his fake mustache fell off. For a second, I exulted. Then, because I'm an idiot, I dropped the hose and went to help him up, but he tripped me, and I fell down hard beside him as the water spiraled fast and cold over both of us. He wrapped his arm around me and rocked me back and forth on the grass, laughing. And I felt his old male strength and smelled his sour green apple smell. And for a second, I was almost happy again. By the time I pushed him off and shook myself and stood, of course, nothing was left but a trail of damp footsteps in the grass, a thread from his hoodie snagged on the gate, tire marks on the curb. I ran out to the street as his bike rounded the corner, took my shoe off, threw it, missed. The last thing I heard was his voice faint on the wind. "Don't worry, dear. It's not funny," I shouted. "Over," he said, and disappeared. The end.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we've got some questions, Margaret. Oh, here we go. Start with a word count. John, what do you do?
I don't start with a word count. I try to, I've already wrote a note to write a flash fiction about a dictionary definition after that wonderful piece of flash that you read. It's like, why didn't I think of that? I do like to use nonfiction literary nonfiction pieces to write fiction in, like postcards, like intake forms at the hospital, and it just take a note, turn it into fiction rather than into nonfiction narrative, play with the form. So I think of a form. I may start with a character, which is general, but then the character's got to do something. And I want to put him somewhere. So I think I might say, let me try a fairy tale, or I get a lot of ideas for stories from visual images, from photographs, from paintings. I particularly like narrative photographs and narrative painting. I like Edward Harper photographs. Paintings, and the WPA photographs. Take a character, decide which character, where are we, and go tell a brief story of the moment. But you can the idea of taking a recipe, for instance, and turning that into a story. Or you can also do, is I had a student in the Flash book. There's a bit of this book here. There's an example of a graphic short story that one of Jared Rossello, who teaches at USF now, but it was a student of mine here as an undergrad. There's beautiful flash fiction stories, beautiful graphics where the graphics are as important as the words, I think. Anyway, so I start there. I don't count the words, and when I get if I get say this could be shorter, I always do try to overwrite at the beginning, right, and then condense it, because it's easier to take out than to put in for me that way. So I don't mind, taking tangents and trying to surprise myself. It was Graham Greene said, and in the moment when you're writing a story, there comes a moment when your character does something you didn't think he could do, or says something you didn't expect him to say, and that's when the story begins. That's when you have a character and you have a person as a character, and you're always kind of looking for that moment, and it's always a surprise to you the way it's a surprise in a story, in a flash story. So I'm looking for the surprise always to see what's going on. Where do you start?
Oh, well, I see another question has popped up. How do you determine whether a very short oral story or experience will work in writing? Are some just better told than written? Oh, that's a good question, Catherine. There are stories that I tell with my mouth, just to entertain or, get a laugh or be outrageous. And they're different than the ones I want to write down on paper. And I think the one way I know whether it wants to be on paper is if there is a kind of tension or crunchiness that needs to be teased out. And the pacing can be different, because when you're telling an oral story, you have to say everything at such a rate that it could be understood in someone's ear at the rate of being said. When you're writing, you get to play a little bit more with pacing, I think, and also play a little bit more meting out comprehension for a reader. Also, I think writing a written story can sometimes incorporate more reflection or perspective, the idea of how something appears to someone later. But I think that there's a lot of similarities between the two art forms, and I'm actually trying to learn a little bit about storytelling more now. I've gotten more into it as I've gotten older and gotten a little less shy, because I grew up in a culture that said, girls should be seen and not heard, and always giving the spotlight to other people. And now I'm a big loudmouth. At 51, I talk all the time. So I've kind of belatedly become a storyteller, I guess, in my life. But I see my friend Jack just popped up with BA tells the best stories. So maybe I'm doing something right if a friend is going to vouch for me there. So thank you very much.
Are there other questions?
With flash memoir, how do you find that surprise John speaks of? So with John was saying that the moment when a character does something that you didn't expect, that's when you're like following the vein of gold and you should keep following it. I agree. The difference is with flash memoir, the character is you. So sometimes I'm trying to figure out why I did something, not a character did something, but why I did something I don't exactly understand. Eudora Welty said, write about what you don't know about what you know. And I think that that's kind of interesting. To return to your past with a question you're genuinely troubled by, to return to your past with a sense of curiosity, or just to look around the world and think, why would someone do this? What would possess someone to do this or say this funny thing? And keeping it small also by couching it in white space and allowing the moment to resonate as a moment that reverberates. You take this one, John. How do you find inspiration that will fit into fewer words?
I try to find we live in a provocative world, and what we want to do is make ourselves let's see, how do I want to say this? We want to respond to the provocations and give our imagination opportunities. A story can start with any image at all. So a pair of shoes under a radiator with salt stains on them. And that's just that you begin a story there. Whatever you see that captures your imagination for just a moment. You don't have to know why you're intrigued by this image or something you just heard. Just write it down, and your imagination will figure it out later. Why this was so intriguing to you or so surprising to you. So it's just it's paying attention to the world, really. Paying attention and looking for something, letting your imagination go to work. And that is usually, your imagination goes to work when you're thinking about things you don't know about, that you don't understand. It's like, wow, look at this. Why did this happen? Like, what about those boots? Who owns those boots? Who else lives in this house? Oh, is that a dog bowl over in the corner? And then you begin to build a story, a world from that. So it's just like paying attention, what's out there. So many, it's almost like you got to stop looking. You want to say, I can't write this story too. I'm writing this other one. How many things can I write at the same time? Some of them pan out, and others you keep working at. I never give up on a story. I just like, okay, I'll put this over here for now. I'm coming back to that, because what I try to remind myself when I'm stuck in a story somewhere is like, why did I start this in the first place? Where did I get the energy and the excitement about the story? And go back to wherever it was. Go back to that moment and say, okay, that's what, and then you can carry yourself forward from that. I mean, I can't, it works for me that way. So don't let yourself, if you bog down, you bog down. That's part of the process. We all get bogged down. We all get blocked, we call it, but that's our excuse because we don't want to do that right now. And then you go back, but you were excited at one point. Get back in touch with that excitement, and that will carry you through. I don't know. Yeah.
Hi. It's me. Okay, so I know we actually have to go, and I have my gong thing ready, but we had one more question from Tom DeMarchi, and he's the director of the conference, so we can't ignore him. So flash answer from you flash people, like 1 minute and less. How does your humor inform your stories?
Go ahead, John. And I would also like to point out that Tom is basically like sucking information out that he can use in his own class. Do you teach your class, Tom? Teach your class.
Now that's funny. So we could write a story about that. No, I mean, I think, I don't know. I find humor everywhere. And very often not the outrageous humor, but I find humor in some of the saddest moments in life, things that are sad going on, looking for, maybe it's like trying to redeem yourself or redeem your character. Well, let's take a breath here. I've always said to myself and to my students, if you're writing something dark and you're going on, give the reader space to breathe. Stop that chapter now. Put in the funny guy who, when he walks in, everybody laughs. Put him in there and then go back to the other stuff. You need time to take a breath. And so I use humor in that sense. One of the ways I use it is to give the reader a chance to like sit back and breathe. And me too.
Yeah, I think storytelling and humor are both coming from the same place, which is that we're looking for surprise and we're looking for events leading up to something that are that reveal something that we didn't predict, reveal something about human nature, and often those revelations are funny. And I do use humor more in my work as I've gotten older. It's something I didn't do when I was younger because I wanted to be taken seriously. And now it's one of the great joys of being alive is being able to laugh at myself and other people.
I didn't even have to gong you guys, but I will anyway because I have.
Go ahead, do it.
Ready?
Yeah.
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 Oh, well done, Jenna. Gemma,
Thank
I
you.
hope everyone knows, is the force behind a mighty blaze who organized all the techie parts of this, and we're so grateful for your help.
Thank you. All I do is sit here with my gong, and my team does everything else. But thank you so
good
much
team.
no, seriously, I have an amazing team. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for Flash Fiction. I've been flashing everybody behind the scenes. It has been great. And we are going to go over and hang out with some thriller writers now. So don't go away, except you guys are going to go away, but you can come back and join us for the thrillers.
Okay.
Thank you, John.
See you
Thank
next
you,
year.
everyone.
See you next year live and in person.
Yeah, see you next year on the beach, y'all. See you next year.
More flashing, more gonging
Yes.
on the beach live in person. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for watching. See you soon.